Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with another Survivor Top 10 video. This one's starting a bit of a mini-series here, where for a while I've been wanting to do these top 10 videos based around my favorite characters in Survivor history, and initially I was just going to do a general top 10 characters of all time. However, when prepping that video, I kind of realized that it doesn't allow me to talk about some of my other favorite characters in the history of the show. So with that, I decided to do a couple offshoots of it, starting it off here with the top 10 pre-merge characters of all time, where here I'll be talking about my 10 favorite characters that were all booted before the merge on their seasons. And through that, everyone that ends up being on the list here ends up being a one-time player. Now, technically, if you were a returning player that was booted in the pre-merge both times, you would be eligible for a list, but no one from that category ended up making my top 10 here. Now, later on, I'll also do a ranking my top 10 characters that were only on one season, and then also do the general list as well. But again, we're starting off with pre-merge characters. Now, when assessing characters here, again, obviously this is not including any gameplay aspects of these people. This is purely me ranking them on how entertaining I personally feel like they are on the show, whether that be through the humor that they bring, through having interesting confessionals, have interesting downfalls. Like, there are a number of ways to narrow down this list. Those are the main things I'm looking at when ranking the players here. But with that, let's get into the honorable mentions, where I'll be going through them in chronological order of when they first played, starting it off with Survivor Palau for some reason. Here we do have James Miller, which is a character I've always personally found really funny. He's someone that has this pretty funny editing quirk where pretty much everything that he ends up saying in the confessional ends up being wrong, where it felt like the editor's just openly mocking him in that situation of just showing his overconfidence coming back to bite him, which was just a really humorous plot thread of the season. But even beyond that, again, I just felt like he had some fun confessionals. Him saying "my stuff" is always something that I've always remembered, though to be fair, that might be more attached to the evolution of strategy, but still, I mean, James is definitely a character I still remember fondly, but did not make the cut. Another one in a similar case, this one from Survivor Panama, we do have Dan Barry, and Dan is probably a person that I think most people just kind of forget about. However, Dan is a character that I always found humorous in the sense that he is obviously this astronaut that talks about keeping his profession a secret, only for him to then reveal it to people in this like grandiose way, which I always found humorous, and how, despite his talk about how he wants to keep it a secret, he ends up bragging about it quite a bit on this season. Again, that's a fun little storyline from him. It's also just kind of humorous that he gets this heroic exit when he gets voted out as well, but again, didn't quite make the top 10. Next one, someone that was very much a consideration for a top 10, and that person is Billy Garcia from Cook Islands. And really the main reservation for me in not putting him in the top 10 is the fact that I do just find the overall storyline of him and Candace to just be super cringy. While it can be funny at points, and the reactions from everyone else in particular being funny to it, it's like, I don't know, I just feel like it just seems kind of mean-spirited, where it becomes less fun in my eyes. Again, he didn't make my list. Next, from Gabon, I have a couple people here. First, we're starting off with Ace, who I've always personally enjoyed. Now, I think the one thing that's holding me back from putting Ace on the list is the fact that I don't think he has like this big grand moment that really stands out. I mean, he's essentially this like Coach light, being on the season before Coach ended up being on the show and being this guy that no one seemed to believe anything this guy said, with him having this British accent and some people even questioning if he actually even was British. Again, there are some interesting plot threads, but I just felt like he barely missed out on the top 10. But also from Gabon, another humorous character to me, and that is GC, who does have a couple notable moments here, and him being picked to be the leader only for him to then almost immediately step down from that position, which is a humorous plot thread. Also the fact that he disappears from camp for a while to the point where they don't know where he is at the time they have to leave for the challenge. Like, those are kind of humorous things, but again, didn't quite make the list. Next up, the only returning player that was in consideration here is Russell Swan from Samoa, who, again, I greatly consider putting on here. I do love his storyline in Philippines and how tragic it is, though I think that's really more so suited for like a story arc video more so than a character video, where Russell himself is an entertaining personality, but I don't feel like it would have been that would put him on this list. I think, again, it's more so his overall storyline, which, again, feels kind of separate from character to a degree. So, again, he didn't make it on. From South Pacific, I did consider Papa Bear, who's another character that just kind of like sticks out to me. For some reason, I just always remembered Papa Bear's like super thick accent and him talking to Dawn, even though, again, that might be evolution of strategy related, but I do still feel like Papa Bear ends up being a somewhat notable character, but again, didn't make the list. list. Next up from Philippines, we have the first boot, one of the only first boots in consideration here, and that is Zane Knight, who, again, is obviously just a really wacky character in that first episode. Seeing him making deals left and right, and then plotting this blindside of Russell, only to then tell everyone to vote him out, and like all that's super fun. Again, he didn't quite make the top 10, partially due to the fact that, again, we just get so little of him, where it's just the premiere episode, and even beyond that, he would have just barely cracked the list. Next up, a character that I really thought was going to make the top 10, and to be fair, he is definitely one of these people that's like hovering around the top 10. However, I decided to leave him off, and that person is Drew Christie. And Drew Christie is obviously great TV. I mean, his downfall is one of my favorite episodes in all of Survivor, especially pre-merge episode. However, again, I decided to leave him off this list, largely because while that one specific episode is fantastic, I feel like the rest of his run just kind of whatever. I feel like the people that did make the list at least have more notable storylines as a whole to me, especially for moments outside of gameplay, where I feel like most of Drew Christie's fun character quirks do come from just how badly he plays the game. Like him campaigning against Kelly when Kelly's right next to him, and him throwing the challenge in a position where he obviously goes home. So again, like, there's fun character quirks, but I feel like they're all related to gameplay, so because I kind of left him off. Next up, moving on to HHH, and here we do have Alan Ball, another person that was right on the edge of the list here. I mean, for a while he was on the list. He was pretty much like number 10. However, I think my issue of Alan Ball as a character is the fact that he is not super prevalent on the show after the premiere. I mean, he's a major presence in the premiere. I mean, he has some great character moments there, particularly in his conversation with JP, where he makes JP strip to prove he doesn't have the idol, and that's really funny. But really, it's like after that, it's like his episodes 2 and 3 are mostly subdued, and he does get into this rivalry with Joe on his way out, but I do feel like his content as a whole was a bit inconsistent, to where while he does have this big moment of his confrontation with JP that ends up standing out for him, he just barely misses the list here. Next up, from Ghost Island, I did consider Jacob Derwin, who, again, was very much in consideration, but I kind of feel like he is another one that's like kind of based around just how badly he plays the game. Now, again, there are a couple other more notable moments. I mean, the fact that he puts the rice in his sock when looking for an idol clue, that's pretty ridiculous, and his overall aloofness in the game is funny, but it's like, as a whole, again, like, he was definitely in consideration, but just didn't make it on. Next up, someone that was, again, also hovering around the top 10, was actually on the list for a bit, however, I knocked her off, and that person is Reem from Edge of Extinction. And again, Reem's obviously a great character. I mean, she gets into confrontation, she has this fun vernacular, but as a whole, I was struggling to really think of like a singular great moment from Reem, to where I feel like just other characters stick out to me a bit more, though again, she was very close to making it on. And the last honorable mention here I'll mention is from Survivor 41, and here we do have JD. And again, I think JD's a fun personality. I think he's someone that you can just tell was like having a lot of fun out there, and does have some fun dodo moments, though again, as a whole, I did feel like those moments weren't to the level of the people that made the top 10, so again, he didn't make it on. But with that, we do have the top 10 now. Let's start off at number 10. We have another person from Survivor 41, the only person in New Era to actually make the list here, and that person is Brad from Survivor 41. And Brad is a character that, again, barely made the list here, but I was watching back some of his scenes, and I just found them to be super humorous, and particularly the Beware Vantage line of him just like really forcing himself to say it in front of Jeff, and that was just super funny, especially with like him kind of like beating himself up for how he does it immediately afterwards. But even beyond that, I mean, we do have the moment of him telling Shan and Sarah that one of them are going home, again, telling them to their faces, which is pretty funny. I mean, his entire boot episode is like this great character piece on him, and really just as a whole, again, I just found them super fun to rewatch some of his more notable scenes, to where, again, he barely makes it on the list. Like, really, again, you could swap him out for someone like a James, a Drew, an Alan, a Reem. But when making this list, Brad was the one that definitely stuck out the most to me out of that bunch. Now moving on to number 9. This was another person, again, kind of bordering on the list, but definitely a character that stands out to me, and that person is Dave Cruiser from Survivor China. And Dave is a character that I remembered loving the first time I watched Survivor China. Him, again, getting this massive dodo edit of him being portrayed as this Zoolander-style figure, this egotistical, control freak sort of guy that has a whole bunch of people mocking him in confessional over it. But he is someone that is confrontational and a bit domineering around camp. We do see his storyline with the fire pit, which is really humorous. But really, the character moment that stands out the most for me is the fact that he just gets naked during this super physical competition against James. And again, while it wouldn't fly nowadays, just the ridiculousness of him attempting to do something like this and just be easily thrown away by James in the process. It's just a really humorous scene there. So again, for me, I felt like Dave stood out to where I have him at number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to another character that I remember loving when this season originally aired. And I do feel like this person's probably a bit more forgotten about as time went on, though again, I've always liked this character, and that person is Vince Sly from Survivor Worlds Apart. And again, Vince, there's a few things that haven't aged as well. I mean, particularly like his interactions with Jen, which just are extremely awkward. But I mean, just inherently, Vince is a great character. I mean, his occupation is a coconut vendor, which is already kind of humorous. But he also has this like one-sided rivalry with Joe, which ends up being kind of funny. But I've also just loved his downfall. I've always loved that second episode where Vince, despite coming off as this massive dodo, he actually ends up almost orchestrating a 3-2-1 vote, only for that to all be messed up by a misunderstanding with Nina, making Will think that Vince is targeting him, which all that is just a really funny downfall for Vince as well. To where, like, again, considering him being a coconut vendor and him having these pretty bad moments of gameplay, like for that to be followed up with almost orchestrating a pretty impressive move is just a really humorous dichotomy to me that has always made Vince Sly stand out in my mind. And because that he's here at number 8. Now, number 7, moving on to a character that I remember not liking as much when the season originally aired. However, as time's gone on, her storyline ends up being a pretty humorous one. That person is Jatia from Survivor Cagayan. And again, like the entire premise of her dumping out the rice and the tribe still deciding to keep her over Garrett is just such an insane thing to happen in the history of Survivor. But even beyond that, again, she is this person that like is very controlling early on and tries to lead the tribe in the camp building despite her not doing anything to help in the camp building, which just annoys her entire tribe. And that's a pretty funny aspect of her story, especially considering the shelter that she ends up designing ends up not working. And even the way she ends up getting taken out is a pretty notable one, where it's this notable tribal where people talk about how much Jeff is trying to influence the women and trying to get rid of Jatia, and that's like kind of a notable thing of Jatia to me as well. But obviously the big thing is still the rice dumping. I feel like that's the thing that Jatia is always remembered for, and again, such an iconic moment to where it gave her a pretty easy spot on the list here at number 7. Now, number 6, moving on to the most recent player left on the board here, a pretty widely talked about great character from the pre-merge, and that person is Natalie Cole from Survivor David vs. Goliath. And again, Natalie is just such an incredible character, from again also how domineering she comes off as, but really goes even beyond that to where she's at a point where like people are telling her how controlling she's being and telling her to die down, and she just simply doesn't believe them, where we see Mike trying to give her advice in the game and her instead wanting to now target Mike because he gave her that advice, which is super humorous. But even beyond that, Natalie has this great rivalry with Jeremy, which ends up being a fun storyline, and her Natalie Napalm confessional is still really fun. And she ends up going out in a situation where she's part of Jacket Gate, where Angelina asks for a jacket on the way out, and that's a super humorous plot thread as well. And while that is more of a pro for Angelina, which we'll talk about in later videos, I just still feel like Natalie still gets kind of lumped in with that to me, to where, again, like Natalie's just such a fun character, particularly due to her domineering personality, and because that for me, she's here at number 6. Now, number 5, we're moving on to a character that, I'll be honest, was not on the list when I originally put this list together. However, again, I did some research in terms of looking back at some of the best moments from some of these players, and it really skyrocketed this person on the list. At number 5, I have Sandy Bergen from Survivor Tocantins. And again, rewatching all these little moments from Sandy is just super funny. I always remember her saying, "I'm pissed," when she gets voted out at the very beginning, though again, that might be a evolution of strategy thing, though even beyond that, we have her not knowing what a pace is, and her entire idol hunt ends up being a really humorous storyline. She just in general has great confessionals, where she's one of these people that is just really funny to listen to every time she speaks. And she also has fun little moments like her trying to pull off Aaron's top in a challenge and like pretending she's at a rodeo. You have her talking about seducing Steven, and again, there's like these fun little moments along the way that I do feel like Sandy does stand out quite a bit to me now, and because that for me, she's here at number 5. Now, number 4, moving on to, again, a character that I look at pretty similarly to Sandy, and to be fair, Sandy probably has more content as a whole than this person. However, I think this person probably has a grander moment in the grand scheme of things, and that person is Stacy Powell from Survivor South Pacific. And again, Stacy's another one of these people that, like, just listening to her talk in confessional is just super fun. Another person that you can just listen to her talk about anything and find it entertaining, but even beyond that, she has great reactions to things. I mean, her reaction to the Brandon Hance reveal is really funny. We obviously have the moment of her being voted out and her denying Coach's hug, and that's really funny. Her constant calling of Coach Benjamin is a really funny aspect of her character as well. And then obviously you have the great moment at Redemption Island where she gives her speech about how Benjamin is running things and talks about how fake everyone is there. And again, that's just a super humorous moment as well. Like, Stacy really is a character that does stand out, with her just being such a naturally entertaining person, and because of that, for me, she's here number 4. Now, number 3, and really these top 3 are 3 of the biggest dodo edits in the history of Survivor in my eyes, each of them being extremely fun to watch. Bad number 3, starting it off with the person that's probably the least likable of the 3, and that person is Lisi Linares from Survivor Fiji. And I mean, Lisi, again, there is this aspect of Lisi just being straight up mean-spirited to people, and there even being these like racial undertones, particularly in terms of how she treats Dreams and Cassandra, and like all that's not great. But I mean, she is still such a fantastic character in my mind. I mean, just the moment of her being not picked for the swap and her hoping that she was going to be taken out of the game, only to be disappointed with Jeff saying that she's going to exile, and Jeff himself being annoyed at her for that, is just all really humorous there. We have the moment of her tripping during the match challenge, seeming extremely confident in what the answer is, only for her to get it wrong anyway, and that's funny. We have her eventually being voted out by her own allies at a position where she just decided to stay in the game. We also have her misread on the idol, and that's funny. And then we have her final tribal speech, which I've always found super funny. Again, like, there are these racial undertones that kind of do mess with things, but just the delusion that Lisi displays and her talking about Cassandra's water shoes, it's like so stupid, and it's so funny to me because of how much Lisi thinks she's getting one on them, when in reality she herself is coming off as a massive idiot. And again, all that's just super funny to me, and because of that, for me, she's here number 3. Number 2, another really humorous character. Another one of these like proto-coach style characters, and that person is Cowboy from Survivor Cook Islands. And Cowboy is just such a funny character to me. I mean, he has this coach-like mentality of him telling these weird stories and no one on his tribe taking him seriously, along with the fact that he makes these like insensitive jokes that get on his tribe's nerves. We have him stumbling across the opposite tribe's camp and ends up annoying them through him telling his stories. Again, all that's just super funny. But also his eventual downfall is just really humorous as well. Where again, kind of like when I talked about Vince, like he's this guy that just comes off as this massive dodo for most of his run, but then in his boot episode, he all of a sudden creates the concept of a split vote, which obviously ends up being a major Survivor strategy moving forward. And due to him creating that strategy, Yul decides to vote him out so he can't use that strategy against him. And again, that's just a super humorous aspect of Cowboy's character as well. Again, Cowboy to me is just such a funny character, with again him very much coming off as this coach light. And because of that, for me, he's here number 2. Now number 1, the number 1 character that was booted in the pre-merge is the earliest person on the board here, and that person is Rob Zabatnik. Rob with 2 B's from Survivor Thailand. And again, there's just so many great character moments from Rob. And 2 B's, guys. 2 B's, definitely one that stands out. But even beyond that, again, like his rivalry with Sheehan's really funny. Again, there is like maybe a bit of ickiness there, but still a humorous plot thread with Rob just coming off as an idiot throughout those entire scenes. But we obviously have the attack zone challenge of him literally choking Clay and then him being confused at why he's being DQ'd. Then we have him following that up with him saying we got beat by a bunch of rules. Again, that's funny, but he's another one that like his eventual boot is also extremely funny, but not in a strategic way where again the Cowboys and the Vinces come off as strategic on their way out. Rob instead ends up just completely shifting his character on his way out, where he comes off as this kind of douchey skater punk for most of the season, but then in this final episode he realizes how wrong he's been and he wants to fix things back at home and change who he is as a person. All that's just super funny, especially considering it didn't seem to last. So the fact that there's this massive dichotomy on his way out is just funny as well. And we have him bring a skateboard as his luxury item on to a beach. And Rob to me is definitely the character that stands out the most of these pre-merge boots, and because that for me is here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my top 10 characters that were booted in the pre-merge. Now again, moving forward, I plan on doing one of these for one-time players and another one of these for the top characters of all time. So stay tuned for those sometime down the road. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.